Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Roger Humphrey. In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome composer, educator Lee Kesselman. Lee has composed for choirs, chamber music, opera, and many educational situations. Before we begin, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. It's free and easy, and it really helps out the channel a lot. Also, recommend me to your friends. Let's keep this thing going. And we are welcoming to the show Lee Kesselman. Hi, Lee. Good morning.
Hi, Roger. Good morning.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. I really, really appreciate this a lot.
It's great
So
to be here. It really is.
thank you. Thank you. First off, just kind of a little truth in advertising here. Although I am a guitar player by trade, um, uh, I'm an old choir geek from my junior high school
Ooh.
and high school days, and I have actually conducted church choir a few times.
Uh-huh.
So it was a real treat to listen to your music. I think you're the first choral composer that I've had on the show, and so it's just a real treat to have you on, and I can't wait to just kind of get into this.
Oh, great. Great. It's funny because, of course, this CD that you've been listening to is not choral music, but that's
Right.
been bread and butter for most of my life, is conducting choirs and writing for them.
Right, right. Well, the CD was a real treat. I mean, it's so nice. To begin with, I do love. I mean, probably one of my favorite forms of music is chamber music,
Mm.
and I've played chamber music for many, many years in different configurations, including one trio that was guitar, clarinet, and flute. That was kind of interesting
Ooh, nice.
and and it worked out really well. But to listen to the piano, violin, and voice was just a real nice combination. It really is. So, and the music is lovely. As a matter of
Thank
fact,
you.
I was re-listening to excerpts this morning a little bit, and Sakura kind of stuck out immediately. That beautiful old Japanese folk song, and a lot of these folk songs from various parts of the world just really have some really haunting melodies, and that's certainly one of them.
They do. I spent a lot of my life conducting choirs, and then I started writing for choirs a little bit as necessity is the mother of invention. When you say, I've got a perfect program, but I'm missing one piece, I need a fast closer to the first half or whatever it is. And I started doing a lot of arranging at that time, as well as the composing. And because I have a lot of choral music published, I'm always aware of what might work well for the marketplace. And by that, I mean, mostly educational music, high school, elementary, children's choirs, and of course, Haven, clarinet, soprano, and piano is my daughter's ensemble, and I'm very used to them, and I've written for them. But every once in a while, I would think, they're programming music that is all long pieces, and that's great. They do such interesting stuff. I mean, not talking about even my stuff, but other composers. And every once in a while, I would write a piece for them that was short and memorable and tuneful, thinking, well, this will program well for them as an encore or as a beginner or as an ender or something like that. And so Sakura is one of those pieces. At the same time, I was thinking, what a beautiful tune, what a beautiful possibility for a unison choir, which is children or it could be any age, I suppose, but it would also work for solo voice. So that was one of those things that I wrote with two things in mind, both Haven and also the fact that it would be published, which it is by Boozy and Hawks, and that children could sing it. We one of the things that's happened of late is that we've scrutinized a lot of people who are writing music that's not from where they grew up or that they're not
Oh,
the culture bearer for. And I'm not Japanese,
sure.
but it seems to me that one of the things it's important. The discussion is very important about culture bearers and so forth. But one of the things we lose is walking in other people's shoes. And for me to get inside the head of a Japanese folk song that I've known probably since I was in elementary school, that's a challenge, but also a really exciting and great thing. It's like going to a sushi restaurant. I hope they won't bar me at the door because I'm not Japanese when I want to eat sushi. But but you get my point, which is that here I am setting a Japanese folk song in a way that I think new people might encounter it and encounter it for the first time. So I'm proud of that, and also the Gershwin on the other end. Um,
Yes.
that the American Songbook, wow, what a treasure for all of us. And um, Gershwin is probably my favorite of all of those boys, although they're it's hard to beat many of the people we consider the American Songbook. But write something a little jazzy and it's got a clarinet solo and that is again part my mother would have said, this is our music, this is my music, her era, but fun to do. And audiences love listening to that music if the arrangement is decent and the playing is great and singing is great. So those are the two pieces that are published as choral pieces, but also they're the two arrangements and everything else on the CD is original for Haven.
Right. You're talking about this sense of this concern of cultural appropriation. And I get that. I totally understand that. On the other hand, uh, I have done some writing over the years, not very good, but but a few things here and a few things there, and it's interesting to, and for me it's just been guitar stuff, but the interesting thing for me is listening to somebody else play my music
Mm,
and finding and hearing things in there that I didn't really recall. It's just, or they will find something to lean on in that song that I had, for me, was just a throwaway.
right.
And so I think that by playing a folk song like that, it's not so much cultural appropriation, but I think it's a melding of the two,
Mm.
of bringing your sensibility to that particular piece that has its own cultural sensibility, and not necessarily stealing it. It's just like, taking a recipe and making it your own a little bit.
Well, I think you're right, and I think we're a better world somehow when we all walk in other people's shoes a little bit. It's funny that you should say that about hearing your music done by someone else and how enlightening it is, because I've always felt that way. There's a piece that I wrote for a consortium of 13 choirs about 2 years ago, and I've
Wow.
now heard four of those choirs perform this piece, and every conductor and every choir and every space and every audience is really different. And often I find things that I didn't know were there or that I didn't appreciate in the same way. It's what you said. There's a throwaway little tune and somebody goes, "Oh my gosh, I love that moment." And you think, "Oh, oh, I guess I do too." But I just premiered a song cycle last week in North Carolina of 5 songs called Prairie Epitaphs. It's on
Oh,
my SoundCloud station and published by North Star Music, which is a Michigan publisher. And at one point, I was I was called in at the last minute to play the piano because the pianist was not well. So I flew down there. We had one day of rehearsal. Boom, boom, boom. Did the recital. Only the one set was mine, and the rest were by other composers. And at one point, I just stopped in rehearsal and said to my daughter, who was singing, said, "Oh my gosh, Purcell, Dido and Aeneas, Dido's Lament." And she said, "Yeah, was that not on purpose?" I said, "No, it was not on purpose at all." But there was just a moment of about 3 measures where I thought, oh my gosh, the music has a completely different resonance because I'm drawn to all that's in that great piece by Henry Purcell. And I
uh-huh.
didn't even know it was there. So not only was it not stealing, I mean, it's like shoplifting without knowing it's in your pocket. You walk out of the store and go, where did this come from? And I don't mean to make crime sound insignificant, but you know what I mean is that I had no idea. It was the key, it was the voicing, it was a little bit of the chord structure. And this happens all the time. That you sometimes you write something and then you listen back to it and think, oh no, that really is too close to something that Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote or Lerner and Loewe or somebody, and I really have to change that. But it's all in there as a composer. Everything you've ever heard is wandering around in the murk that is within our ears and our brains and our souls. And so occasionally it comes out in a way that's recognizable to somebody else. And as a lifelong musician, which I know you are, um, there's a lot of music that passes through your ears and your brain. and it would be impossible to be not affected by that.
Right. I agree 100%. I know that probably on a little different scale, but I've read in interviews with Paul McCartney talking about dreaming yesterday. And he didn't even want to play it to anybody for about a month because he was afraid all he had done was remembered something, that it had come out so naturally. And that is for anybody who's creative or particularly like this, that is one of our biggest worries. Did I really write that? Or am I just remembering something that somebody else wrote from somewhere else?
Right. And the key is that sometimes, I like the way you put that with the McCartney interview. Sometimes it seems so natural
Yeah.
and so easy to get it down on the paper. You think that must have come from somewhere else. It was too little work for that to happen. And sometimes it's your own and it's original, and sometimes it's filtered something else that's there. But these cases, the court cases about plagiarism and, was this really a Marvin Gaye song or was it really something else?
Right.
And the answer is half the time we don't really know. I suspect there are times where people say, I really like this song. I think I'm going to just tinker with a little bit and then I'll call it my own. But I don't think it's very common. I think usually it's just in the atmosphere and in the ecosphere, and then
Right.
all of a sudden it comes out.
Well, on staying with the Beatles theme for a second, George Harrison ran into that, went with My Sweet Lord because the melody is from the pop tune He's So Fine. And
Right,
and they took him to court. He tried to fight it, lost. And because it's so obvious, and even
right,
before he died, John Lennon was asked about it. And he says, well, yeah, of course it's the same song. He says, but he didn't do it on purpose.
right, right.
I mean, that's and so it is very difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
So, so now you write for choir. You wrote for this group Haven. Is Haven Michigan based? I'm sorry.
Well, they all have a Michigan connection, but right now the pianist lives in Toronto, the singer lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the clarinetist is from Denton, Texas. So, but at one time, Kim and Midori, the clarinetist and pianist, knew each other in Michigan,
Okay.
and they have a connection to Eastern Michigan. They have a connection to Eastern Michigan University
Yes.
and Michigan State. And then my daughter, who taught for a while at Eastern Michigan and who went to school in East Lansing, they all met each other through their Michigan connections. Some of them
Ah,
knew each other while they were there and in various combinations. I'm sort of an honorary Spartan because I visited so much and I have friends who teach there. So Haven has been going for about a little bit over a dozen years, maybe 14 years. They do almost all contemporary music. They do residencies, they get together and rehearse in some city and then do a concert and maybe a recording. So they get together maybe two, three, four times a year, and they've been doing that. They've commissioned a lot of pieces. As I say, they do almost all new music, and I've been fortunate enough that they've been willing to do a number of my pieces. On this CD, Would That Loving Were Enough, there are two pieces for cello, piano, and voice, and the rest are all for clarinet, piano, and voice. And so obviously the cello pieces weren't written for Haven, but um, it seemed like a nice match to put them on this recording.
and I misspoke myself earlier when I said violin instead of clarinet, so I apologize.
Well, the clarinetist has the most amazing set of colors. I have to say, there are times in listening to her when I have to stop myself and think, is that really a clarinet? So when you said it, I thought, there are times when she sounds a little bit like a string player. It's just such a beautiful sound. And she gets the most exquisite pianissimo in person. You hear that sound. And again, if you're used to listening to wind instruments, you know that sometimes it's hard to get those really soft sounds so beautiful. But Kim manages that.
I worked with a flutist for many years in a duo, 25 years, and that's an instrument that if you're not careful, it can be kind of shrill.
Yes.
And sitting next to her, she would sit to my right, and I never, ever, ever, ever once wanted to be anywhere else or wanted her to be anyone else. That she just had such a beautiful sound,
Yeah.
and we worked well together. And the guitar flute is a nice combination. So
A great
so
combination. Yeah.
so anyway, that was that was really cool. So you've written some children's stuff for children's choir. How do the kids respond to that?
I love working with children. I live in a town which is very famous for having one of the top children's choruses anywhere. It was
Oh,
called the Glen Ellen Children's Chorus for many years, and in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And now they've renamed themselves Anima, which means spirit. And uh, so I one of the first pieces I wrote for choir was for them, for children's choir. And I also taught for many years in the Choral Music Experience Teacher Training Institute, which was a training program for conductors, many of whom were from the children's choir world. So I have a lot of friends in that world all around the world. And I love the purity of children's voices and the variety of colors they have. And the fact that when children sing in a children's chorus, they may or may not have solo voices that are ready to be heard alone. But when they sing in a children's chorus, they are so much greater than the sum of their parts, and they can be incredible artists with the right kind of leadership. So that's fascinating. I do, during the COVID lockdown, I did less of this, but I always do a lot of travel as a composer and go and visit choirs. So I'm often where things are being premiered or doing residencies or working with the kids if it's a children's choir. And they're much more open to the new than adult listeners and adult
right.
singers.
That's
They,
interesting.
you know, they don't have a context by which some things are okay because they're familiar and other things are just not okay because they're brand new. They don't have that context that some adults have, not all. And as a result, they have great questions in Q&As. I'd say every year I write a few pieces for children's choirs, and a lot of them have been published. They Some are arrangements, some are original pieces. I just did an arrangement for unison chorus and piano of the English song "Christmas is Coming" for a
Oh,
group of first graders at a local Catholic school, and I'll be hearing that in about 2 weeks, hearing it premiered. But just as important as the premiere for me is getting a chance to go and work with the students and with their teacher and answer their questions. Every time I work with children, somebody comes up afterwards and says, I write some music, but I'm not really a composer. And that'll be an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old. And every time I say, if you write music, you're a composer. You may not be as practiced as I am, but you are a composer. And, children are creating all the time. They live in a world of creativity and of enthusiasm for the new. So I love that experience. The instrument has great possibilities in color. They have a lot of range. What we call children's choirs in this country sometimes go from kindergarten all the way up through high school. Um, Sometimes they're all, the Portland Symphonic Girl Choir is all girls. The others are mixed. The younger groups, the boys haven't changed yet. Sometimes there are boy choirs, but a lot of my catalog is really children's choir music, and I'm very proud of that. And I feel like that's where our future is. The future of classical music that we're always complaining is going to die in another generation. But this is maybe the most fertile time it's ever been for new music composition in general. I think the electronic media have a lot to do with that, the accessibility. But certainly children's choir music and young people's music, um, that really is the future. Those kids who fall in love with a new piece that's still in manuscript, where they meet the composer, they're going to be concert goers and they're going to be
yes.
lifelong avocational music makers, and their children are going to have music lessons. And it's the future does not belong to people with gray hair, who are in the, sitting
Or
in
no
the
hair.
or no hair, sitting in the downstairs of orchestra hall, listening to pieces they've heard their whole lives. I mean, that's wonderful, and I'm there with them. But the future really belongs to young people and how they approach these art forms.
I used to teach very young children guitar. I would start them at kindergarten, and many of them would be with me until they graduate from high school. It was a lifelong thing for them.
Yeah,
And I'm still friends with a lot of them and their families. You get to know the entire family,
right.
and such. But I can remember one time sitting with in a lesson. And when they're very young, I ask a parent to sit in just so we don't have discipline issues and things like that. Number
Sure.
one. And number two, um, the kid goes home and says, and mom says, well, what are you supposed to practice this week? And Mr. Humphrey said I didn't have to practice this week.
Right.
So if they're in the room, we just avoid that conversation entirely,
Right.
but I remember working with a 7-year-old, second grader, I think, and we were doing a little Renaissance piece. Of course, we're reading music and a nylon string guitar and all that kind of stuff. And he's just tearing it up, actually a little girl, and she's just really getting with it. Her father's there, and the guy looks like he could be a professional linebacker. He's just a huge man.
Right.
And he's got tears the size of your thumbnail rolling down his cheeks because he's watching his little girl play this beautiful music, and she's playing it very well, and she's playing it with such joy in her heart.
Yeah.
Because nobody told her it was old-fashioned. Nobody told her it was boring. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's true with old music, where sometimes, I mean, it all depends on where you've been and what you've experienced. But
Sure.
with Renaissance music or Baroque music, um, if no one tells you that's old stuff, you shouldn't like it,
Right.
then that won't apply. And if it's brand new music, nobody's going to say, "Oh, it's new music. I hate new music." If it's all a fresh canvas, you see it in the art museums all the time. That a child, my grandson, will be walking through the Art Institute in Chicago and fall in love with something very abstract or very dark or whatever else it is. He doesn't know that there's any dictum against that. There's nothing in his experience that says you shouldn't like that. Because he's open to all of it. And if you asked him when this piece or when that piece was created, he might not know yet, but it doesn't matter to him because he's encountering each work of art like, oh, well, that's interesting. It's a
On
sort of
its own level.
a new friend, exactly.
Right.
And again, it's like children making friends. Watch them. They they don't discriminate on the basis of anything. They don't know to do that. They meet somebody and they'll say, "Yeah, that person's nice." That's what they care about. Is that
Right.
person nice? Were they easy to
Right.
talk to?
Right.
And the fact that they may look different or be from a different place, that's so irrelevant to a child. And so I think writing for children, writing music for young people, writing music for educational settings has that joy in it all the time. And I love writing for professionals and for more experienced people and adult choirs and everything else. But I think there's a special place for music for children.
So you also have written some operas, is that correct?
Well, yes, I've written two operas. I've been working on a third for about 20 years. We'll see if it actually ever takes place. But the first one was written for a group called Opera for the Young. They're a Madison, Wisconsin organization, and they tour operas to schools. And they commissioned me and my librettist, Jim Tucker, to write a piece that they could take out. Now, they're used to traveling with four singers, sets that they fold up into a van, costumes, um, and they wanted a piece that introduced children to different forms of music, like recitative, aria, duet, fugue, various things that we as musicians would know about. And they wanted it also to have a part for the children. So we took the Grimm's fairy tale, the Bremerton musicians, and we made it into about a 45-minute opera. And there's a role for the children. They play a little band of robbers in it. Um, and usually one of their teachers or one of the students is a town crier, and another one is the robber chief, the head robber. And that piece has been done almost 400 times in about
Oh,
seven
wow.
states because opera companies are looking for a way to reach out to younger audiences and develop audiences for the future. So I'm really proud of that piece. Later on, Jim Tucker and I wrote a piece based on the Emperor's New Clothes for a young people's concert, but for a professional choir that I was conducting. So we had soloists and choir, and we had I think it was bass, flute, piano, and percussion in the pit. So it was another opera, but for young audiences, but for adult performers.
Now, was
Um,
that staged?
it was, I think, semi-stage. I mean, with a
Okay.
chorus, you can only do so much in
Right.
moving them around. But so I would say semi-stage. The principals, the lead singers were moving around, and it was somewhat costumed. It wasn't a real elaborate production, but so those are the two operas so far. The next one's going to be for adult audiences. I don't mean it to say that it's an adult adult opera. That gives it a somewhat tawdry um, connotation, but not for children. Let's just put it that way. And like I say, it's been in process for about 20 years, and by gum, we're going to finish it this time. So we'll see what happens.
My, I've told this story before, but my son, when he was about 13 or 14, uh, went to the opera with me, mostly because I was just looking for somebody to go with me. My wife wasn't interested. So he's just kind of being nice to the old man kind of thing. And we went and saw The Elixir of Love,
Oh,
and
great.
and which is Donizetti. I mean, it's just, and it's not big, heavy, it's pretty easy to follow. And he absolutely fell in love with opera. You
Yeah.
got this big football kid who loves rock and roll and country music and rap, suddenly becoming an opera freak also. And so, at least once a year until after he got married, we would have what we called guys' night out. And we would find an opera and we'd go to the opera, just he and I, and we go to dinner afterwards and all that kind of stuff. And when he became of age, of course, we go have a drink or two, and that kind of thing. But it was who'd have thunk?
Right. Well, again, it has to do with how it's introduced and which one you chose. I used to have students say, I'm thinking of going to the opera. I live in Chicago. There's a great opera company.
Sure.
Um, which one should I see, or is it important? And I would say it's very important that you find the right opera to go to for your first one. And try to pick one that had what I would consider universal appeal, either a comic opera like Elixir of Love, or something that's tragic, but the music is so beautiful, maybe a Puccini opera, La Boheme or Madame Butterfly.
Right.
Um, but rather than a really dark opera where everyone dies and the stage is awash in blood.
Romeo and Juliet.
Well, I was thinking more like Electra by Strauss, which I love, but I would
Yeah.
never send anyone there for their first opera experience. And I'm always amazed at the opera that there'll be there'll be an 8-year-old girl wearing a beautiful little dress for an 8-year-old, and the parents have brought her to the opera, and it's something so dark and and maybe mean-spirited. And I think, oh, they could be seeing. I mean, operas like Carmen and La Boheme, where people die, that's not a problem. It is a problem if it's really a dark opera. You might say, well, tragedy is dark, but children get tragedy. That's not a problem. They know about that. It's,
Sure.
if you see too many weapons and too much bloodletting on the stage and the music is pretty harsh, that's probably not a good choice for an 8-year-old. But every year there's somebody there with their children, and you think you just need a little advisor who says, of these operas, go to this one and don't go to that one. I love opera. My kids love opera. Of course, they're both musicians, but I think, you know, it's music, it's dance, it's costume, it's sets, it's drama, it's all those things. If done well, it's life-changing and memorable. And I love the idea that you and your son made boys' night out, not playing darts at the local bar or going bowling. That both of those are great, but the fact that you introduced him to opera at a young age and that he has a memory, and again, at some point in his life, that may come back with his introducing a child to opera, with his deciding when he's in the right place as a tourist or maybe where he lives. Wow, honey, you want to go see an opera? I saw this when I was 13 years old and I have such warm memories. And that's how culture stays alive. It's teachers and parents mindfully helping younger people get in touch with these pieces that have lasted for hundreds of years. I mean, that's what music education is about, right? And
Sure.
about
Right.
what you're teaching guitar is about and doing a Renaissance piece. And sometime that girl asks you, so how long ago was this piece written? And you say, oh, 400 years. And her eyes pop out of her head. And she says, what else could I listen to from that period? And you give her something, and she just goes home to her computer and puts it on YouTube and goes, I love music from the Renaissance. This is so exciting. And we see it, in popular culture now and again when people are introduced to the old or the traditional. And they didn't even know it was there. But once they hear it, they think, oh, I think this is for me too. And I think, we do that with sports. That's great. We do it sometimes with visual arts, sometimes with theater, film. is pretty universal at this point,
Uh-huh.
but there's no reason classical music can't live in those spaces too.
Exactly. You had mentioned briefly the pandemic and some of its effects. I went on YouTube and was watching the video from Something Missing that was done during the pandemic. And one of the things, it's a beautiful piece of music, and I will start right with that. But beyond that, it was a small chorus, look about 16 people, I think, that did it. The thing that struck me was because of the pandemic, how far out they were spread. And
Right,
so as you're listening to it, at least I was anyways, I was listening to it. I realized I wasn't just listening to these voices, I was listening to the room. That
right,
the quality of the sound changed so much. And I'm used to just having everything bunched together and then
right.
pushing
Yeah.
outward. And to have it spread out over that big space and being sung that way. And I just thought there's just something very enjoyable about that. I think I would almost look as a former conductor. I think I would look at that and say, I could do that. I could spread my people out a little bit and
Right.
get that sound, depending on the room, of course. Did you notice that? Was that something you picked up on?
Well, in general, in small choirs, I space my singers out pretty far. I think they hear themselves better and they
Uh-huh.
still hear the whole group together well. Now, there are different schools of thought. There are those old Lutheran choirs that used to lock arms and sing. It was like the marching of the Lutheran army, as it were. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but that's a great sound and it's a great look. I like for a chamber choir, I like to really spread them out a little bit. But that piece we started rehearsing online on Zoom because we couldn't even be meeting as a choir. And
Sure.
so um, it- that piece was a kind of an experiment for me. It dated back to my 1960s and 1970s heritage um, of aleatory, of music with random procedures. And so essentially, most of that piece is a unison piece, but they sing it independently, kind of at the same time, if that makes any sense. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so I wrote the text for it. It had to do with how I felt there were things missing while we were in pandemic mode. And my
Sure.
mother had died, was in the process of dying when I wrote the text as well. So had a very personal feeling to it. But we were started rehearsing it online on Zoom. And I said, we're all going to sing the same melody, but you're going to come in for each phrase when you feel like it and sing it as fast or as slow as you want to. And you can take more time with some words if you want to. And so we rehearsed it a little bit online. We had we did it. I sang it or played it for them. They sang it back individually. And then I had them all turn their microphones on, and it was a mess, like all Zoom choral music. It was um it was sounded very randomized, but that was actually the point was that happens until near the end when it comes together. And then I said, well, that's how we're going to perform it, is that I wrote it to be rehearsed on Zoom, but performed live in person. And so eventually we came back together as a choir. And I said, okay, now do it the way you did it on Zoom. And they all tried to sing it in unison. I said, no, no, no. I want you to come in individually. We had one person who would start each phrase, and then the other singers would follow in after that. Um, and I said, I want it to sound just like it did on Zoom when we all had our microphones on and when it wasn't coordinated. They were a little freaked out, but then they realized that was the effect I was looking for was to do it that way. We ended up performing it recorded and well, live and recorded, streamed essentially,
Uh-huh.
without an audience in the hall at all. So part of the room was the chorus spread out, and part of the room was a completely empty audience on the stage where we usually performed. And then it does come together at the end. So it was a lot of fun. That was if you're given lemons, try making lemonade if you can. If you can't rehearse together as a group, try rehearsing online and write a piece that can be rehearsed online and then can be performed. Aleatoric would be the technical word, but with random processes in person. So we got a pretty good video performance of it because it was being streamed, and that's of course accessible from my website too.
That was absolutely delightful. So, gosh, believe it or not, we are totally out of time, Lee.
Oh my gosh. Give a college professor an inch and he will take a mile. We used to say that, people would say, "Oh, you spoke for 10 minutes. That's amazing." And I'd say, "No, no, I can speak for an hour about nothing because I've been teaching college my whole life." But, I just want to make sure that anybody who's watching knows that the CD you were listening to is called Would That Loving Were Enough. And it was produced by Blue Griffin Records, which is a Michigan company.
Right. I actually just interviewed a violinist named Tigran Shiganyan, who will be on the show
Hmm.
shortly, and he has 3 albums out through them. So
Yeah, Sergei Kvitko, who's the recording
yes.
artist, and I say recording artist because he is truly masterful. That may be about the best set of ears I've ever heard in the business. And we did recordings last summer, and I thought I knew the music well because I had written it. I didn't realize that Sergei's ears, some fast passage would go by, and he'd say, I think that A natural is a little bit flat, and it would be in the middle of a whole batch of notes. But he's such a great musician, and of course great with the technical side. So it was great fun making it. And if somebody's interested in my music, they can go to kesselmanpress.com. That's where all my music is listed, and there are links to the SoundCloud station. And there's people say, "Do you have anything online?" And I say, "I have so much music online. You you will get tired long before you run out of the list and
Well,
what's
I will put a link to Kesselman Press in the description so that
that's
people
great.
can get to it easily. So, but in the meantime, thank you so much. I
Well,
really,
thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking the time to do this with me. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. It's great to get to know you a little bit, and I love the
And
conversation.
yeah, me too. We'll
Okay.
talk soon, I hope.
Okay. Take
Bye
care.
bye.
Bye.
I want to thank Lee for taking the time to come on the show. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I urge you to go to his website, kesselmanpress.com, to learn more. Also, type his name in the YouTube search bar and you'll find many performances of his music. Please take a listen. You'll be glad you did. You can also hear him on SoundCloud and find him on Amazon. Links to all of this are below. Did you know that I now have a weekly blog that will keep you updated on my guests? Just go to www.rogerhumphrey.com and hit the blog tab at the top of the page. While you're there, you may as well subscribe. Again, it's free and easy, and I promise, no spam. Thanks again for listening. I hope you'll continue to listen to Creative Conversations with Roger Humphrey.